quantity demanded is low. And when the price is low at this point, we basically were able to understand that quantity demanded is essentially very high, very high. Together, team. On the other hand, we also talked about, on the other hand, we said on the other hand, we also touched on relationship. We say that from the demand curve, the demand schedule, we were able to establish that when the price is high, the quantity demanded is low, and when the price is low, the quantity demanded is essentially very high. Then we are also able to say that we were also able to establish that the demand curve sloped downwards, from left to right. That the demand curve sloped downwards from left to right. Then lastly, as a recap, we did talk about what's called the law of demand. So on the law of demand, we say that ceteris paribus, when you say ceteris paribus in economics, it basically means that other factors held constant. When the price is high, the quantity demanded is low and vice versa. The quantity demanded is low and vice versa. Then you got the factors that affect the factors that influence the demand. One of the first factors that we talked about was price. And we were able to establish that when other factors are held constant, we were able to understand that the lower the price, lower we say the price, the lower the price, we say the higher, we say that the higher, we say the higher the quantity demanded. We say that the lower the price, the lower the quantity demanded, and you say it and vice versa. The lower the quantity demanded and vice versa, implying that the opposite is true. Now, when the price is high, the quantity demanded is low. Is that at home? Tuko sawa on that. We respond with a yes. The notes are there. So no writing notes. You only pick what you think is very important. We respond with a yes if you're together. If you're together, you respond with a yes. If you're together, then you respond with a yes. Then you respond with a yes. So the second factor that we talked about, but this one is other factors held. We talked about income. The second factor, we basically talked about income. And we say that whenever we talk about income, we say that for a normal good, remember in economics, on basic terms in economics, we talked about goods. For a normal good, the higher the income, the higher, we understand that the higher, we say that the higher the income, we say, comma, the higher, we call it the higher the quantity, demanded, the higher the quantity demanded, and you say it and vice versa, The higher the quantity demanded and what we call vice versa. That is for a normal good. However, we talked about what we call exceptions. Whenever we talk about exceptions, it's basically contrary. So on exception, Mwalimu talked about two kinds of goods on exception. Number one was an inferior good. We call it an inferior good. Then we had what we call necessity. An inferior good and necessity. So then, number one, Mwalimu talked about, when he talks about inferior good, these are goods that are demanded by low income earners altogether. So number one, at the back of your mind, we did say that an inferior good is a good that is basically demanded by low income earners. So when the incomes of the consumer basically rises, they no longer demand this good. So it doesn't follow the same pattern as the normal good. The second category, we talked about necessity. For example, consumption of sugar. Does the demand change? The demand remains constant. Then I did come up with a table for these particular goods where I said on that table, I say that this is income. And on this other end, this is quantity demanded. So what is happening for a normal good? We basically understood that for a normal good, this is how the demand curve essentially moves. This is how what I call the demand curve basically moves. This is how the demand curve moves for a normal good, for a normal good, for a normal good, for a normal good. Then I talked about what's called inferior good. Inferior good. Look at, as income increases, the quantity demanded low, because these are goods that are demanded by low income earners. Then lastly, I did talk about what's called necessity. I did talk about necessity. When you look at necessity, when you look at the necessity, we basically understood with the necessity that, the demand remains the same with increase in income together. The time factors is, this was the second, we call it third, we call it future expectation, we call it the future expectation in what we call in changes in price. What I call the future expectation in changes in price. What I call the future expectation in changes in price. The future expectation in changes in price. So on the future expectation in changes in price, of changes in price, I want to ask, for example, a simple question. When you expect, we say expect the price to increase in the future. What will happen when you expect the price to increase in what's called in the future? When you expect the price to increase in the future, when we expect the price to increase in future, what will be happening? And I want us to grow this class. I want us to spread the good news altogether. We need to get to 20 in this class, 25. Is that okay, Stella? And I hope you're joining us. Are we together, Gillian? So we expect the price to increase in the future. What will happen to the demand now? When you expect the prices to increase in the future, what will be happening to demand now? The demand now will be very high. Now we understand the demand, we say, will be very high. Are we together? Remember, people do not want to buy commodity at a high price. So the demand now is essentially going to be very high, very high. We respond to this. Are we together? The second scenario, when we expect what we call the price, when you expect the price to reduce, we say when you expect the price to reduce, you say in what we call in the future. When you expect the price to increase, to reduce in the future, we say that in the next 3 months to come, we basically expect the prices to be maybe 3 times lower than they are. Are we going to buy now? Are we going to buy now? Priska, are we going to buy now? We're not going to buy now, but you're going to preserve. The demand now is going to be very low. Now, demand now, we say that the demand now, we say is going to be, we say very low. The demand now is going to be very low. The demand now is going to be very low. So the demand now, we understand, is going to be very, very low. We respond with a yes. The demand now is going to be very low. Together. The demand now is going to be very low. I hope we are together. So if you're together, bonyeza yes tafadhali. Perfect, if you're there. So then we move to the next, what we call the price of what we call of the related price of what we call the related products. What we call the price of the related products. That was the fourth altogether. So whenever Malimo talks about the price of related products, we have 2 related products. We have what we call a substitute. We call it a substitute good. We have what we call a substitute good. And then we have what we call a complementary. We call it a complementary good. So we have what we call a substitute good. And then we have what we call a complementary good. So I want to talk about these 2 commodities. So When you talk about the substitute goods, we say that these are goods that cannot be used to get together. For example, if we are using one, we do not use the other. Examples of a substitute good, we know them that coffee, we have coffee and what's called tea. Those are substitute goods. Coffee and tea, those are substitute goods altogether. So can you consume coffee and tea at the same time? Can you consume coffee and tea at the same time? No. Is that okay? Can you consume coffee and tea at the same time? Definitely no. You can't consume coffee and tea at the same time. Therefore, what are we trying to say? If these substitute goods, we understand at the back of our mind that we cannot consume them together. We understand that if the price of one good goes up, are we together? If the demand for one good goes up, if the price of the substitute increases, so the demand of one good goes up, we say the demand of what I call one good goes up, and say if the price, if what I call the price of what I call of the substitute, if the price of the substitute, if the price of what I call the substitute, we say increases. So if the price of coffee goes up, it therefore means that the demand for tea is going to rise, the demand for tea are going to rise. Then the second, we call it complementary. So whenever we talk about complementary goods, whenever we talk about what's called complementary goods, we understand that complementary goods are goods that are normally used together. Complementary goods are goods that we understand are used together. A given example of a complementary goods are what we call motor vehicle and fuel. They must work hand in hand. Another example is ink and pen. Ink and pen. So we basically say that if the demand of a good goes up, are we together? The demand of a good goes up if the price of complement decreases. If the price of fuel goes down, the demand of cars shoots. Are we together? If the price of a commodity goes up, if the other complement price reduces, are we together? So I've said that if the price of fuel goes down, automatically more cars are going to be demanded. So say the demand for a good, we say that the demand for what I call for a good goes, say it goes up if what I call the price of what I call of the complement, if the price of the complement, we say it reduces, and what's called vice versa. So if the price of complement increases, the demand for the complement reduces. You give me a yes if we are together. If we are together, then we respond with a yes. If we are together, then we respond with a yes. Perfect. That is perfect. That is perfect. So then we get to the next, we talk about population as the next factor that affects the demand. We call it population. Population. As economists, when we're basically engaging in sales together, we are 30. We say in this class we're 30. Those who have missed today, we just say we are 30. Are we together? So whenever we talk about population and what is the influence of population on demand, whenever you're starting a business, if you understand demand, you basically set a business where the population is high. Why are you going to set a business where population is high? We basically understand that with a higher population, there is higher demand and vice versa. If I say to tell where the population is high, I know for sure people are going to demand for food. So the higher the numbers, that's why people will scramble for canteens for those who are in campus altogether. People will scramble for these canteens to be given these canteens altogether. Why? Because the population is very high in those campuses altogether. Why do people scramble for those canteens to get space in those colleges, in those universities, in those schools altogether because of population. So basically, at the back of your mind, we need to understand that the higher the population, the higher the quantity demanded, and vice versa. So say that the higher, we'll call it the higher the population, we'll call it the higher the higher the population. We say that the higher, we say that quantity demanded, the higher the quantity demanded, and we say, and vice versa. The higher the quantity demanded, and vice versa. The higher the quantity demanded, and vice versa. The higher the quantity demanded, and vice versa. I want to talk about maybe a few, then the other ones I'll give you as assignment. So I can talk about number one, we can talk about taste and preference. We talk about taste and preference. Taste, we call it taste and what's called and preferences. Taste and what's called preferences. Taste and what's called preferences. What we call the taste and preferences. We call it taste and preferences. So I want Boniface and Ndinda, I want you to be part of this class. So you can talk to Mwalimu. I will leave my number and the number for the college so that we make sure we talk and we join this class. So taste and preferences altogether. You see, whenever we talk about taste and preferences altogether, in particular seasons and in particular moments, you'll always find taste is aligning to a particular product altogether. A given example, Boni, Preska, Gillian, and Ndinda, you realize that in certain seasons, young people love this particular cloth. Is that true? Is that true? In particular seasons, you'll always find young people are attracted to a particular farm, a particular product altogether. The taste is aligned to a particular product altogether. The taste is aligned to a particular product altogether. So basically, you need to understand that demand is always high for those commodities as people's. The demand is always high for those goods that are of people's taste and preference. So demand, we say that the demand, we say is high, and say for those commodities, we say of people's taste and what's called preference. So those products that people love, the demand is always very high for those particular commodities together. The demand is always high for such particular commodities. We respond with a yes. The demand is particularly high for those particular commodities. We respond with a yes. Then we can talk about fashion. We can talk about fashion. We can talk about the next fashion. How does fashion, for example, how does fashion relate to the demand? Are we together? And understand at the back of your mind that as we even talk about fashion, we understand that fashion is always contrary to the law of demand. If a product is in fashion, people don't care. People will put money into that product. If a particular product is in fashion, people do not care. People will always put money into that altogether. So demand is always high for those goods that are in fashion. And remember, there's a particular season then where young people, I don't know how those jeans were called, but for that particular season, those jeans had bottles. Do you remember that time? So the demand for such particular product was very high. Why was those jeans in high demand? Because of what we call fashion. So say that demand is high for goods in fashion. Demand high for what we call for goods. We say in fashion, and we say low for goods which are out of what we call fashion, and low for those products that are out of fashion, and low for those products that are essentially out of product fashion. Let me get just a minute. So for those goods that are out of fashion, then, but you need demand for fashionable goods is contrary to the law of demand. The demand for fashionable goods, we say demand for fashionable goods. We understand that as an NB, demand and B, demand. We understand that the demand for what I call fashionable goods, demand for what I call fashionable goods, the demand for what I call the fashionable goods is against the law of demand, is what I call against what I call the law of what I call of demand, is against what I call the law of demand. So demand for fashionable goods is against what's called the law of demand. Demand for fashionable goods is basically against the law of demand. Those were 7. I can discuss 2, then the rest I can give as assignment. I can talk about the level of advertising. We can talk about the level. 8, we can talk about level of what we call of advertising. So whenever we talk about advertising creates what we call awareness. We get to know something together. So we know that extensive or higher advertising leads to higher quantity demanded. Extensive advertising, we say leads to what we call leads to higher quantity, we call it demanded, higher quantity demanded, and we say, and vice versa. So extensive advertising will always lead to what we call higher quantity demanded and what we call vice versa. Extensive advertising will always lead to higher quantity demanded and what we call vice versa. We respond with a yes. Vice versa say that when you have low advertising, for example, what is the essence of giving this free class? What is the essence of giving this class? To create demand so that Stella can come and check our product. And at the end of the day, once the Stella checks our product, it may make a decision. Maybe Stella is in the process of making a decision. So if we advertise, as in we advertise by giving even free classes, you'll find Stella gets to a position that Stella is able to make a decision. Is that true? So that we say that with higher advertising, there's higher demand and vice versa. Then I want to talk about what's called seasons altogether. And just explain this altogether, seasons. I explain what it calls seasons altogether. If you look for example, warm clothes, when is the demand for warm clothes very high? When you're looking for warm clothes, when is the demand for warm clothes essentially very high? Demand for warm clothes. When is the demand is very high? Demand for warm clothes. When it's cold? When it's cold. Are we in agreement? The demand for warm clothes is always very high when it is cold. When it is cold. On the other side, when it's very, very hot, we realize that we demand for lighter cloth when it's very warm or very hot. That's why you find people wearing vest and shorts altogether. The very light clothes, very light shorts, and very light, if it's a top, they're very light altogether. Then I can also talk about, lastly, 10, we call it government. We call it government policy. The last one, we call it government policy. What is this government policy? So we have a number of government policies altogether. The government can encourage demand. And how does government encourage demand? The government can decide to encourage demand by doing what? By reducing taxes. If the government reduces tax and gives what we call subsidies, the government is basically encouraging the demand. If the government, we say that reduces the taxes and gives what we call subsidies, then we understand that the government is basically encouraging what we call the demand. Are we together? So these are the factors that affect the demand. Assignment for the team. Assignment. We have what we call the assignment. So I want you to tell me how these factors, you will provide for me how these factors will affect the demand. One is what we call availability of credit facility, availability of what we call of the credit facility, availability of the credit facility. And the second, we call it, the second we talk about customs and tradition. Customs and what's called the tradition. These are the two assignments that I want you to do for me. You can keep those two assignments. Those assignments I would love you people to keep to do for me. Is that okay? So we move to the next. I want to talk about what I call individual demand, and what's called individual demand, and what's called market demand, and what's called the market demand. Individual demand and what's called the market demand. Tuko sawa? Individual demand and what's called the market demand. Individual demand and what's called the market demand. So we start with an individual demand. We start with what's called individual demand. Start with what's called the individual demand. So whenever we talk about individual demand, so whenever we talk about individual demand, we're basically saying that we are relating it to a single commodity. We're relating it to a single commodity. So we're saying is the quantity demanded is the amount of a commodity that individual. We are simply talking about individual demand, one individual. Amount of a commodity that individual consumer is willing and able to buy at a given price over a given period of time. So we call it amount of commodity, amount of what we call a commodity. And the one is that an individual consumer, we say is willing, let's say, and able to buy, willing and able to buy, and say at a given price, and you say over what we call a given period of time. So is the amount of a commodity that you say an individual consumer is willing and able to buy, and you're saying at a given price over a given period of time together. Then the second concept is the market. We'll call it the market demand. The second concept, we call it the market demand. The second concept, we call it the market demand. So the question is, what is a market demand? The question is what is a market demand? So a market demand is now aggregate. Many consumers, not a single consumer, but many consumers. So we call it aggregate. We call it aggregate of what we call of individuals. Aggregate of what we call of individuals. Consumers demand. Consumers demand. In what we call in a relevant market, what we call the aggregate of individual consumer demand in a relevant market. So for example, I can say that the market demand, DM, this is the market demand. So this should be equals to, we have D1, this is an individual, the first individual consumer. I have D2, the second, we can make them small letter. D1, the second individual consumer. Then we have D3, up to as many, depending on the market together. So this is what we call the market demand. Allow me just to tilt it so that we can see what Malemo is doing. So this is the market demand. So this is basically implying that DM is what's called the market demand. Are we together? So when you talk about D1, D2, and then we have D3, and then we have DN. These are what's called summation individual. We call them individual demand. We call them individual demand. We basically call them individual demand. So D1, D2, D3 to DN is basically what's called individual demand. These are individual demand. So that's why we call the market demand as what's called aggregate of individual consumer demand in a relevant market. Market depends. You can have a market with 1,000 individual consumers. You can have a market with 100. You can have a market with a million. We respond with a yes if we are together. We respond with a yes. Kama tuko pamoja. If we are together, we respond with a yes. So then I can also diagrammatically, then I teach something, based on exam. How do we tackle this in exam? So I'm asked something. For example, I'm asked in an exam, define what you call a market demand. Nimesahau. I don't know what to do. I can even draw it together. Gillian, I have gone to an exam. I have been asked what is a market demand. I have forgotten aggregate of individual consumers demand. I can simply come here and have this. This is D1. Remember, this is price. This is quantity. And then you say plus the second individual. This is D2. This is P. D2. Then this is quantity. Then I can say this is D3. We have P. We have this quantity. Then we have DN. This is P. This is quantity. So this will lead to what we call the market demand, which is DN. This is price. This is quantity. So in an exam scenario, Linda, let me just tilt the board, adjust the camera. Perfect. Let me adjust the camera. Now you are able to see. So if you look at this is the first consumer, the second consumer, the third, up to the number that is given. So when you add that gives you what's called the market demand. Together, Gillian, that gives us what we call the market demand. DM, which is the market demand. Yes, that gives us what we call the market demand, which is DM. That gives us what we call the market demand, which is DM. That gives us the market demand, which is essentially what we call the DM. That gives us what we call the market demand, which is DM. That gives us what we call the market demand. As everybody understood, that if I get to an examination scenario and I don't remember this definition, aggregate of individual consumers demand, then you can draw this and the examiner, you will be provided for. So we give it a yes. Then I proceed to what's called reason why people demand for goods and services. Reasons why, we call it reasons why we say people demand for what we call for goods. Reasons why people demand for goods and what we call services. Why do people demand for goods and services? Why would you want to take a very good meal? Why would you want to buy a good dress? Are we together? Why do people demand for a good? If you ask, why do people demand for commodities? Reasons why people demand for goods. Nataka to check it out. So the first reason is what we call impulse buying. Have you ever seen people, they don't need something, but they just buy? So the first reason why people demand for good is what we call impulse buying. So someone did that. The first reason why people demand for goods is what we call impulse buy. There's no need, they just buy because they have money. The second is what we call incentives provided by what we call government to encourage people to buy. Remember in 2020 when we had COVID, and I hope all of us were there in 2020, in 2020 when you had COVID, the government basically provided incentive where the government were basically paying producers to subsidize the unga. Out of the demand, you'd find a family of 6, because the unga in the supermarket was for 100, was essentially getting out very fast. So they say that each person needs to buy 2. So you'd find a family of 6. Each person carries money for 2 to buy what we call the unga. Are we together? Carry the money for the 2 to buy what we call the unga. Are we together? So when a government does essentially provide what's called incentives, it can encourage, for example, the government has subsidized the product by paying producers. People will demand for the product. So together. Then we have what's called the bandwagon effect. The third is what's called the bandwagon effect. You're simply buying because others are buying. Are we together? We call it the bandwagon, or people call it the bandwagon effect. You're simply buying because others are buying. That is the third reason why people demand for goods. But the fourth reasons why people demand for good, we basically call it the snob effect or conspicuous effect. We call it what we call the snob, so what we call the conspicuous effect. What is a snob, or what we call the conspicuous effect? What is this that we call the snob, so what we call the conspicuous effect? It's basically where people buy what we call luxurious or expensive commodity to impress others. It is a scenario where somebody is going to buy a slick car to impress others. So that is what we call the snob, or what we call the conspicuous effect. The fifth reason why people demand for a good, we basically call it the Veblen effect. We call it the Veblen effect. What is the Veblen effect? What is the Veblen effect? So whenever we talk about Veblen effect, we're saying buying a commodity. We are saying that you're buying a commodity to show the public that they're exclusively different from others in society. You're buying something to tell, and one of you is buying something to tell others, I am not in your class. So you're buying a commodity you're demanding a commodity to simply show the public that they're exclusively different from the rest of society, that they're exclusively, we'll say, different from the rest of the society. They are exclusively, we say, different from the rest of what we call the society. They are exclusively different, we say, from the rest of the society. They are exclusively different from the rest of the society. Then the sixth reason why people demand for goods, we call it the basic wants. Are we together? Basic wants is that these are for survival. For example, the basic wants, we have food, shelter, and clothing. Why do we buy them? Because we cannot survive without food, shelter, and what we call commodity together. They're useful for what we call human beings' existence altogether. For example, food, shelter, and clothing. The next reason we can talk about what we call speculative event, speculative purpose altogether. You're basically buying, for example, why do people buy land? You're told that, when you grow, buy land and you speculate. So that in the future, you're told that the value of land is going to increase. So when the value of the land increases, you're able to make money. For example, you're buying shares. If you're buying shares today, maybe the share is 1 shilling. But you're speculating that in the next 6 months, in the next 6 to 1 year, in the next 6 months to 1 year, we expect the value of these shares to basically shoot up. That is what called speculative purpose. But the last reason why people demand for good is expectation of a shortage. When you expect that in the future, there will be what we call a shortage, people will buy more goods now, or people will demand for more goods now. Sorry. Somebody says my network is, the network is not stable. Are we experiencing the same thing? That is Ndinda and Friska. Are we experiencing the same thing so that I can check? Are we experiencing the same thing? So we confirm. Sometimes it could be on your end. Are we experiencing the same thing? Are we? Are we experiencing the same thing? 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 Okay, let me check that. Let me just pause it and check. Let me pause it. Let me check. Let me just join so that I can see if I'm experiencing the same thing. Let me just check so that I can see if I'm also experiencing the same thing. I'm also joining so that I can also see whether the same thing is happening.
Recording in progress.
I'm seeing it's very clear. Is it clear? Can we respond to the yes if we're together? Respond to the yes if we're together. Perfect if it's okay. So perfect if we so I start from 6th. So the 6th one I talked about what's called the basic. I call it what's called the basic. We call it the basic. We call it the basic ones. We demand for commodity. We demand for commodity for our survival. For example, food, shelter, and clothing together. The 7th I talked about what we call speculative purpose, where, for example, we are going to demand for a product in order for, if you expect returns in the future. For example, you're buying land in expectation that the price of land is going to shoot in the future. In expectation that the price of land is definitely going to shoot in what you call in the future. For buying shares today at a low price, in expectation that the share price is going to increase. Then lastly, we have what we call expectation of a shortage in the future. If you expect that in the future there's definitely going to be a shortage, then we are going to demand more of a product now. Add the explanation at home before we put those ones down. Add the explanation at home. To bonyeza yes kama explanation is at home. So one, we said impulse buying. We have one as what's called the impulse buying. We call it the impulse buying. Number two, we have what's called incentive provided by government. Incentive, we say provided by what you call by the government to encourage. We say to encourage. We say people to buy, to encourage people to buy. Incentive provided by the government, definitely encourage people to buy. Incentive provided by the government to encourage people to buy. Incentive provided by the government to encourage people to buy. We have what we call the bandwagon effect. Bandwagon. What do you call the bandwagon? Buying simply because others are buying, because others are buying. Others are buying. Buying simply because others are buying. We call it buying simply because others are buying. Then you have what we call snob, so conspicuous effect. Number four is what's called snob, so conspicuous effect, snob, or what we call the conspicuous effect. So whenever we talk about snob or conspicuous effect, we're basically saying buying luxurious or expensive to impress others. Buying expensive, buying what we call expensive commodity. It's say to impress what we call others. Impress what we call others. Buying expensive commodity, basically to impress what we call others. Buying impressive commodity to impress others. Then we can talk about what we call Veblen effect. We can turn to this and talk about what we call the Veblen effect. We talk about what's called the Veblen. We talk about the next is what we call Veblen. We call it the Veblen effect. We have it as what we call the Veblen effect. So the Veblen effect, you are simply buying so as to show the public that they're exclusively different. Buying to show the public, to show what we call the public, to show the public that they are, say, exclusively different from what we call from others. Different from others. Buying so as to show the public that they're exclusively different from others. Buying so as to show the public that they're basically exclusively different from what we call others. That they are exclusively different from others. Buying so as to show the public that are basically exclusively different from others. I am not in your class. That they are exclusively different from others. Then you talk about basic ones, what we call basic ones. We have what we call the basic ones. So basic ones, we call the basic ones. So basic ones are useful for existence. These are basically useful. We call it useful for what we call for existence. We call it useful for existence. I.e., we have what we call food, we have the shelter, and then we have what we call the cloth. We have what we call the clothing. Food, shelter, and what we call the clothing. Food, shelter, and what we call the clothing. So then we have also what we call 7, we call it speculative purpose. Speculative, we call it the speculative purpose. So when you talk about speculative purpose, we are basically saying buying for investment purpose. This is for what we call for investment purpose, for what we call investment, for what we call investment purpose. We call it the investment purpose. Buying for what we call for investment purpose. Then we have expectation of a shortage in the future. When you expect in the future, there's going to be shortage. We call it expectation of what we call of a shortage in what's called in the future. Expectation of a shortage in the future. Expectation of a shortage in the future. Tubonyeze yes kama tuko pamoja. Tubonyeze yes kama tuko pamoja. Then I step into something else that is now interrelated. We call it interrelated demand. Interrelated, we call it the interrelated demand. We'll step into the next, we call it the interrelated demand. The next, we call it interrelated demand. So whenever we talk about interrelated demand, we have a number of what we call interrelated demand. One is what we call a joint. One is what we call a joint. One is what we call a joint demand. Joint demand is same as complementary demand. We have what we call competitive demand. We have what we call composite demand. We have independent demand. We have independent demand. We have what we call independent demand. And then we have what we call derived demand. But allow me to start with the first one. The first one, we essentially call it what we call a joint demand. We call it a joint to what we call the complementary. We call it the complementary demand. So what is joints to what we call complementary demand? What is this joints to what we call the complementary demand? So whenever we talk about what we call a joints to what we call complementary demand, this is to say that if one or more two or more goods are demanded together, if one or more goods, if two or more goods, if two or what's called more goods, we'll say are essentially demanded together, if one or two goods are basically demanded together, are demanded together, if one or two goods are demanded together, then they have a joint, then we'll say then they have what we call a joint, so what we call complementary demand. Then they have what we call a joint, so what we call complementary demand. For example, which are these goods? Car and petrol. We have the car and what's called petrol. Car and petrol. We have ink and pen. Ink and pen. Ink and pen. Those goods are essentially demanded together. Ink and pen. 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 So then we have the next what we call competitive. We have the next what we call competitive demand. The next is what we call competitive demand. The next is what we call a competitive demand. So whenever we talk about what we call a competitive demand, it basically refers to demand for what we call substitute goods. Goods that are competing, you cannot consume them competing for one another. So it refers to demand for substitute goods, refers to what we call to the demand of what we call of substitute good. Refers to what we call the demand for what we call substitute good. It refers to what we call the demand for what we call substitute good. It refers to the demand for substitute goods. For example, e.g., we have tea and what we call coffee. E.g., tea and coffee. Demand for substitute goods, e.g., tea and coffee. Demand for substitute goods, e.g., tea and coffee. E.g., tea and what we call coffee. E.g., tea and what we call coffee. E.g., tea and what we call coffee. Then we proceed to the next. We call it the composite demand. We call it the composite. We call it the composite demand. That is the third one. We call it the composite demand. We call it the composite demand. So what is composite demand? We basically understand that some goods are used for different purposes. We basically understand that some goods are used and say for what we call for different purposes. Some goods are used for what we call for different purposes. When you talk about some goods, we understand are used for different purposes. For example, we understand that steel, e.g., we understand that steel, we say is used for what we call for different. For example, steel, we understand is used for different use, is used for different uses. So we say that the total demand, we understand that the total demand, so because it's used for different purpose, we understand that the total demand of such good is called composite demand. The total demand for such a good is called what's called a composite. It's definitely called what we call a composite demand. It is called a composite demand. The total demand for such goods is called a composite demand. Together, team, is called a composite demand. So then we have the next. That is 4. We call it a derived demand. So whenever we talk about derived, from the word itself, basically emanates as a result of something else. For example, when you talk about demand for timber may result as a result for demand for furniture. We may not want timber, but the moment we desire to have furniture, what happens next is the demand for timber shoots up as a result of demand for something else. Together, team, are we together? So we say describing demand for goods and services refers to what we call demand for what we call for goods and what we call the services. Demand for goods and what we call the services. Demand for goods and services resulting from demand for intermediate, resulting from what we call from the demand, resulting from the demand of what we call of intermediate, or what we call related, resulting from the demand for intermediate, or what we call related goods and services. But let's explain it, in a simple layman language. One of the given examples that I did basically explain to the team, I say that, for example, when you basically demand for furniture, the demand for timber automatically shoots up. Together, Stella, together, Gillian. Together, Stella, together, Gillian. The demand for timber automatically shoots up. We respond with yes. Demand for timber automatically shoots up. So we say this just to explain. Are we together? Some goods being demanded in order to produce others. For example, we can talk about cotton for cloth making. Cotton, we say for cloth making. So as a result of demanding clothes, automatically the demand for cotton shoots up and the timber that I have provided. Then the last interrelated demand, we call it independent. We call it the independent demand. We call it the word independent demand. So whenever we talk about independent, the demand for such commodity are not affected by demand, are not influenced by demand or consumption of another commodity. When you say that you're independent, you are contented the way you are. Are we together? You don't need self-validation. You basically don't need self-validation. So in this case, because we're talking about interrelated demand, you basically say that whenever we talk about what we call independent demand, it occurs when demand for what we call a commodity is not influenced by demand or consumption of another commodity. So we basically say demand for a commodity, demand for what we call for a commodity, demand for what we call for a commodity is not, we say, is not basically influenced by what we call by demand to what we call the consumption, to what we call the consumption of what we call of another commodity, It's not like they derived, are we together? But this one is not influenced by the demand to consumption of another commodity. How the point is at home? Is the point at home? If the point is at home, we respond with a yes. So then I want to introduce what we call movement along the demand curve or changes in quantity demanded. I'm introducing what we call movement along the demand curve. I introduce what's called movement. We call it movement along the demand curve. We call it the movement. We say along what we call the demand curve. Movement along what's called the demand curve. So what we call the movement along the demand curve, I want at the back of your mind, because the name that is very common to the learners is what we call the movement along the demand curve. The other name for movement along the demand curve, we call it, the other name, if at all changes, we say in quantity demanded is the same concept. It's the same thing altogether. Changes in quantity demanded is the same as movement along the demand curve. So allow me to draw the diagram, then I explain what this basically entails. So allow me to put the diagram, to jot the diagram down, then I explain what this basically entails. Then I explain what this basically entails. So on this other side, I have the price. On the x-axis, I have what's called the quantity demanded. Quantity demanded. So this is the demand curve. Are we together? I'll be talking about why is the demand curve sloping downwards or sloping downwards from left to right. I will explain why demand curve is negatively sloped. One of the first reasons, even before I explain it on this class, why is the demand curve negatively sloped? We explain it on the basis of what we call on the law of demand, which basically says that there's what we call an inverse relationship. An inverse relationship between price and what we call the quantity demanded, where we were able to depict that when the price is high, the quantity demanded is low. And when the price is low, the quantity demanded is high. So why does the demand curve behaves like this? Why is it what's called negatively sloped? Because of one of the reasons is the inverse relationship between the quantity demanded and the price. But I'm on what we call the movement along the demand curve. That is something on the later notice. So we have it here, and I hope you're getting the explanation, and I hope you're enjoying our class. So then we have the P1 here. Our quantity demanded is here. Then I have a higher price P2. Then we have Q1 here. So look at what I want to put here. I want to come up with 2 points, Look up. These are the 2 points, X and Y, X and Y. If you move along this curve like this, and then we can also have a movement like this. Tuko pamoja. So on this is what we call the movement along the demand curve, moving from X to Y and Y to X. That is what we call the movement along the demand curve. This is the diagram. Tuko sawa. Is there anybody who needs a break? Kuna mtu anahitaji break. Is there anybody who needs a break here? So we can get, if there's somebody who needs a break, then we can get a small break, then we come back. Is there anybody who needs a break? So how many minutes break? How many minutes break, Stella and Gillian? 15? 15 is too much, no. Let's make it 7 to 10. That will be okay. Then we come back. So we make it 7. 7 will be okay. Is that okay, Stella? 7 will do for us. We can resume. Are we there? We respond with a yes if you're there. Are we there? We respond with a yes if you're there. If you're there, we respond with a yes. We respond with a yes. So we respond with a yes if they're perfect. So then we talk about movement along the demand curve. And the other name for movement along the demand curve is what's called changes in quantity demanded. We record this changes in what it called changes in the quantity demanded. So I want at the back of our mind to understand that whenever we talk about movement along the demand curve, so what we call changes in the quantity demanded is caused by, what causes this? Caused by changes. This is caused by what called by changes in price. So other factors are held constant. So what causes what we call a movement along the demand curve? It is caused by changes in price. Are we together? It is caused by changes in price. Nipatie yes kama tuko pamoja. It is caused by changes in price. It is caused by changes in price. It is caused by changes in what's called price. Give me a yes if you're together. I want to explain this. Are we together? At the back of your mind, understand that this is caused by changes in price. Thank you, Stella. So I want to explain when the price is low. Look up, I explain these things as we see. When the price, we say, is low, and say at P1, when the price is low at P1, when the price is low, and say at P1, look up when the price is low, when the stand is low at P1. So when the price is low at P1, quantity demanded, quantity, we have that quantity demanded is high, and say at Q2. Are you able to see that? Respond with a yes. So when the price is low at P1, we understand that the quantity demanded is high at Q2. Are you able to see that? Quantity demanded is high at Q2. Tafadhali nipatie yes. Is high at Q2. Together. Is high at Q2. Together. Perfect. Stella. So at that point, make a dot. When the price we say is increased, and say from P1 to P2. So when this price is increased from P1 to P2, when price is increased from P1 to P2, what is happening? When you increase this price from P1 to P2. So we understand that the quantity demanded, look up quantity demanded, decreases, we say from Q2 to Q1. So when the price is increased from P1 to P2, the quantity demanded is decreased from Q2, look up from Q2, is decreases from Q2 to Q1. quantity demanded decreases from Q2 to Q1. Are you seeing what is happening? From Q2 to Q1 to Q1. Are you seeing that? Please give me a yes if you're together. The quantity demanded decreases from Q2 to Q1. Tafadhali nipatie yes. Asante Gillian. So while that thing is happening, there's a movement along the demand curve. So we say this causes movement. This causes what we call a movement. A movement, we say along what we call the demand curve. Let's say from X to Y. So this will cause a movement along the demand curve from X to Y. That will cause a movement along the demand curve from X to Y. That will cause a movement along the demand curve from X to Y. Will cause a movement along the demand curve from X to Y. Have we seen that? Tuko sawa. All of us, can you say that we have seen that? All of us, can you say that we have seen that? Stella, umeona hiyo? Stella, umeona hiyo? Gillian, have you seen that? I want to explain something else. I want to explain something else. I want to explain something else. Perfect. So say on the other hand, when the price we say is high, the price is high, and say at P2. So when the price is high at P2, we understand that the quantity demanded, the quantity demanded, we say is low. We say low at Q1. So when the price is high at P2, we understand that the quantity demanded is low at Q1. The quantity demanded is low at Q1. Tuko pamoja, is low at Q1. So when the price we say is reduced, when the price is reduced from P2 to P1, when the price is reduced from P2 to P1, when the price is reduced now from P2 to P1, when the price is reduced from P2 to P1, we said that the quantity demanded, we say increases. We call it from what I call Q1 to Q2. So the quantity demanded, we say, essentially increases from Q1 to Q2. The quantity demanded, we see increases from Q1 to Q2. I hope you can see. So the quantity demanded, we understand, increases from Q1 to Q2. So what is happening while the quantity is increasing from Q1 to Q2? What is this that is happening when the quantity demanded is increasing from what we call from Q1 to Q2, from Q1 to Q2, from Q1 to Q2? We say that from Q1 to Q2, now we have it like this. So this causes the movement along the demand curve. This causes what we call a movement, we say along what we call the demand curve. This causes a movement along the demand curve. So say this causes a movement along the demand curve. This causes a movement along the demand curve from point Y. We call it from point Y to point X. From point Y to point X. This causes the movement along the demand curve from point Y to point X, from point Y to point X. Are we together? From point Y to point X. So this is what we call movement along the demand curve. As an NB, just to wrap up what we have discussed on that particular section, as an NB to wrap up what we discussed on that particular section, we're basically saying that movement along the demand curve are brought by movement, we call it along what we call the demand curve, are brought about, we say are brought, we say about by what we call by changes in price, are brought about by changes, what I say, caused by changes in price, are brought about by changes in price, ceteris paribus, ceteris paribus, ceteris paribus. If you hear this word in economics called ceteris paribus, it just means that other factors, we say are held constant. Other factors are held constant. So it's brought by changes in price. Other factors are held constant. Tuko pamoja. If that is at all, we respond with yes. And so we proceed to what we call shift in demand curve. We call it the shift in demand curve. So shift in demand curve, so changes, we call it changes in what we call in demand. Shift in demand curve, so what we call changes in demand. Shift in demand curve, so changes in demand. Shift in demand curve, so changes. Stella, are you also experiencing the same thing? You're not able to see what I'm writing? Stella, Ndinda, are you also experiencing the same thing? Stella, could you help us to know whether we are facing the same challenge? Stella, assist us to confirm. Assist us to confirm what we are experiencing. Are you experiencing the same thing?
you respond with a yes. Part. Karibu Stella to our class, and I hope you'll be joining us.
Ta-ta. We stop ta-ta. We stop ta-ta.